Falsely accused, Joseph had never imagined that a prison would become his home. The walls were made of stone, the air was damp and heavy, and the iron bars reminded him each day that he was no longer free. But Joseph didn't let the darkness change who he was. Even though he had been falsely accused, even though Potiphar had believed a lie, Joseph kept doing what was right. He helped the other prisoners. He listened to their stories. He cleaned, organized, and served with a heart full of faith. Tis Darfori. Prison warden quickly saw that Joseph wasn't like the others. He was calm, trustworthy, wise. So just like Potiphar had done, the warden gave Joseph responsibility. He let Joseph care for the daily needs of the prisoners and even make decisions. Joseph rose again, from the bottom of the pit to the top of the prison. One day, 2 new prisoners arrived. They were no ordinary men. One had been Pharaoh's cupbearer, the other his chief baker. They had done something to anger Pharaoh, and now they were locked away. Joseph noticed how upset they looked one morning. "Why do you both look so sad today?" he asked gently. The cupbearer sighed. "We both had dreams last night," he said, "but there's no one here to tell us what they mean." Joseph's eyes lit up. "Dreams?" he said. "Interpretations belong to God. Tell me your dreams. Maybe I can help." The cupbearer went first. "In my dream, I saw a vine with 3 branches. It budded, blossomed, and clusters of grapes grew. I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, then placed the cup in his hand." Joseph nodded as he listened. Then he smiled. "This is what your dream means," he said. "The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. You'll be his cupbearer again. The off." Cupbearer's eyes filled with hope. Joseph added, "And when you're restored, please remember me. Speak to Pharaoh on my behalf. I've done nothing wrong. I was taken from my home and thrown into this prison for a crime I didn't commit." The baker, seeing the good news his friend had received, quickly spoke up. "And in my dream, I had 3 baskets of bread on my head. The top basket was full of baked goods for Pharaoh, but birds were eating them." Joseph's expression changed. He paused, then said gently, "Your dream means the 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and hang you on a tree. The birds will eat your flesh." The baker's face fell. It was not the answer he had hoped. For 3 days later, it was Pharaoh's birthday. He held a great feast and called for the cupbearer and the baker. Just as Joseph had said, the cupbearer was restored, and the baker was executed. But despite Joseph's kindness, the cupbearer forgot all about him. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Joseph waited and waited and waited. Still no message. No freedom, no word from the palace, forgotten again. But Joseph didn't give up, because even when people forget, God never does. Joseph's story wasn't finished. Dreams behind bars, 2 years. That's how long Joseph waited after interpreting the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker. 2 long years behind cold prison walls. Each morning, Joseph opened his eyes, hoping it would be the day someone would come for him. Each night, he lay down wondering why he had been forgotten, again. But even in the waiting, Joseph stayed faithful. He still helped the other prisoners. He still managed the work of the prison, and he still held on to the dreams that had once filled. His heart, dreams of something greater. Then one morning, everything changed. Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, the most powerful man in the land, woke up troubled. He had dreamed something strange, something that made his skin crawl and his heart pound. In his dream, he stood by the Nile River. 7 fat, healthy cows came up from the water and began to graze. But then 7 skinny, ugly cows came out of the river too, and they ate the healthy cows. Pharaoh awoke, shaken. But then he fell asleep again, and he dreamed a second dream. This time, 7 plump heads of grain grew on a single stalk. Then 7 thin, dry heads sprouted up and swallowed the healthy ones. Pharaoh sat up in his bed, confused and disturbed. What could it mean? He called for all the magicians and wise men in Egypt, but none of them could explain the dreams. They offered guesses and wild ideas, but Pharaoh grew more frustrated with every answer. And that's when the cupbearer remembered. He gasped and bowed low before Pharaoh. "Your Majesty," he said, "I must admit my fault. 2 years ago, when you were angry with me and the baker, we were sent to prison. While we were there, a young Hebrew man interpreted our dreams, and everything happened just as he said." Pharaoh stood up. "Bring him to me, immediately, in the prison." Joseph heard the sound of footsteps approaching fast. "You're being summoned by Pharaoh himself," the guard said. "Get cleaned up, now." Joseph washed, shaved, and changed into clean clothes. His heart beat fast as he stepped out of the prison for the first time in years. The sun was bright. The palace was grand. Everything seemed surreal, and then Joseph stood before Pharaoh. "I've heard you can interpret dreams," Pharaoh said. Joseph bowed low. "It is not me," he replied, "but God will give Pharaoh the answer he seeks." Pharaoh told him the cue. Dreams, first the cows, then the heads of grain. Joseph listened carefully. Then with calm and confidence he spoke. "Both dreams mean the same thing. God is warning Pharaoh of what is coming. The 7 fat cows and the 7 plump heads of grain represent 7 years of great abundance in Egypt. But after that will come 7 years of terrible famine. The famine will be so severe that people will forget the good years." Pharaoh's eyes widened. Joseph continued. "Pharaoh should find a wise man to oversee the land. During the 7 good years, store extra food in cities across Egypt. Then, when the famine comes, there will be enough to keep everyone alive." Pharaoh turned to his officials. "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" He looked back at Joseph. "Since God has revealed this to you, and there is no one as wise as you, I place you in charge of my palace and all of Egypt. Only I, the king, will be greater than you." Joseph stood speechless. Just hours ago, he was in a prison cell. Now he stood second in command of the most powerful nation on earth. Pharaoh gave him fine robes, a gold chain, and a royal ring. He gave him a new name, Zaphanath-Paneah. He even gave Joseph a wife. At 30 years old, Joseph rode through the streets of Egypt in a chariot, and people bowed before him, not because of a dream, but because of the power and purpose that God had placed in his hands. The waiting was over, but the journey was not. The years of plenty were coming, and so were the years of famine. Joseph's story was just beginning to unfold. From prison to palace, Joseph couldn't believe how much his life had changed. Just yesterday he was a forgotten prisoner. Now, he stood as the second most powerful man in Egypt, wearing fine robes, commanding respect, and riding in a royal chariot while the people bowed before him. But Joseph didn't let the power go to his head. He remembered the pit, the chains, the prison. He remembered his dreams, and he remembered the God who had been with him through it all. Now he had a mission, to prepare Egypt for what was coming. For the next 7 years, the land overflowed with food. The rains came at the right time. The Nile River brought rich soil. Crops grew in abundance: wheat, barley, fruits, and vegetables. Joseph traveled throughout Egypt, organizing storage centers in every major city. He made sure that a portion of every harvest was stored safely. Granaries were filled until the people stopped counting. There was so much grain, it was like the sand of the sea. During this time, Joseph married Asenath, the daughter of a priest. Together, they had 2 sons. Joseph named the first Manasseh, which means, "God has made me forget all my trouble." He named the second Ephraim, meaning, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." Even though Joseph had suffered, he didn't hold on to bitterness, he held on to hope. Then, just as God had shown in Pharaoh's dreams, the 7 years of abundance ended. The skies dried, the rivers shrank, the crops failed, the famine came. At first, the people were not worried. They had heard Joseph's warnings. They knew food had been stored, and just as Joseph had planned, the storehouses opened. People came from every part of Egypt to buy food. And when word spread, people from other nations came too, including a land far away, where an old man named Jacob was running out of food for his family. Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt. "Go there," he told his sons. "Buy food so we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers set out on the journey, leaving behind the youngest, Benjamin, with their father. They had no idea that the man they would meet, the powerful ruler of Egypt, was their own brother. The brother they had betrayed, the brother they had sold. When they arrived in Egypt, they were led to Joseph. He recognized them instantly. They were older, their faces lined with age and travel. But Joseph knew them. They, however, did not recognize him. He was dressed like an Egyptian noble. He spoke through an interpreter. He held himself like a ruler, and when they bowed before him, Joseph's heart raced. His dream, his very first dream, was coming true. But instead of revealing himself, Joseph decided to test them. Not to be cruel, but to see if they had changed. "Where are you from?" he asked coldly. "From the land of Canaan," they replied. "We've come to buy food." "You're spies," Joseph accused. "No, my lord," they pleaded. "We are honest men. We are all sons of one father. There were 12 of us. One is gone, and the youngest is with our father." Joseph kept his face still, though their words struck his heart. "Then bring your youngest brother to me," he demanded. "Until then, one of you will stay here in prison." He chose Simeon to remain behind. The others left for Canaan, afraid, confused, and wondering why this strange Egyptian ruler had taken such interest in them. But Joseph wasn't angry. He was waiting to see if his brothers were still the same men who once tore off his robe and sold him for silver. He needed to know, because the next part of the dream was forgiveness. 7. Years of plenty back in Canaan, Jacob was worried. His sons had returned from Egypt with sacks of grain, but one of them, Simeon, had not come back. And now the Egyptian ruler had demanded something terrifying. They had to bring Benjamin, the youngest son, to Egypt if they ever wanted to see Simeon again or buy more food. Jacob's heart was torn. Benjamin was all he had left of Rachel, the wife he had loved most. Joseph was gone, and now Simeon was imprisoned in a foreign land. He couldn't bear to lose another son. "No," he said firmly. "Benjamin stays here. My heart would break if anything happened to him." The brothers waited. They watched the grain slowly disappear, meal after meal, day after day, until finally Jacob had to make a choice: risk losing Benjamin or risk losing his entire family to hunger. "Take him," he said at last, sorrow in his voice. "But take gifts. Take double the money, and may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man." So the brothers set out again for Egypt, this time with Benjamin. Joseph was in the palace when word came that the men from Canaan had returned. With them was Benjamin. Joseph's heart jumped. He couldn't hide his joy. He ordered a feast to be prepared and had the men brought to his house. The brothers were nervous. "Why are we being brought to his house?" they whispered. "Is it a trap? Are we in trouble for the silver?" But Joseph welcomed them, gave them water to wash, and prepared a feast like they had never seen. When Joseph saw Benjamin, his youngest brother, his mother's son, his heart nearly broke. He had to leave the room to cry in secret. He washed his face, took a deep breath, and returned. They sat and ate, amazed by the strange kindness of this powerful man, but Joseph still wasn't ready to reveal who he was. He had one more test before they left with more food. He secretly instructed his steward to hide his personal silver cup in Benjamin's sack. Then, as they traveled home, Joseph sent his servant after them. "Stop," the servant cried. "Why have you stolen my master's silver cup?" The brothers froze. "We didn't take anything," they protested. "Search our bags. If anyone has it, let him be your slave." The bags were searched, one by one, and there it was, in Benjamin's sack. The brothers tore their clothes in horror. Not Benjamin, anyone but him. They returned to Joseph, fell to their knees, and begged. "Take us all," Judah cried. "Don't keep the boy. Our father will die if..." he loses him. Joseph looked at them, and something deep inside him stirred. These were not the same men who once threw him into a pit. They were different now. They were protecting each other, standing together, willing to sacrifice. And Joseph could hold back. No longer. "Everyone, leave us," he cried. When only his brothers remained, he stood before them and wept. "I am Joseph," he said through his tears. "Is my father still alive?" They stared at him, speechless. Fear washed over them. What would he do? Would he punish them now? But Joseph smiled through his tears. "Do not be afraid. You meant to harm me, but God meant it for good. He sent me ahead of you to save lives." He stepped forward and embraced Benjamin. Then one by one, he hugged each of his brothers. There were no guards, no punishment, only forgiveness. Joseph told them, "Go home. Tell our father I am alive. Bring him here. There are still 5 more years of famine ahead, and I will take care of all of you." And so, the dreamer and the betrayers became a family again, not just through blood, but through grace. The brothers return. The journey back to Canaan was unlike anything the brothers had ever experienced. They traveled with joy, relief, and amazement, but also with hearts pounding at the thought of what they were about to do. They had to tell their father that Joseph was alive. For over 20 years, they had let Jacob believe his beloved son was dead. Now they would have to confess everything. As they rode toward home, their camels loaded with carts of gifts and wagons from Pharaoh himself, they rehearsed the words over and over, but nothing could prepare them for the look on their father's face when he saw them. Jacob stood at the entrance of his tent, eyes weary with age, watching the horizon. When he saw the line of travelers growing larger in the distance, his heart began to race, and then he heard the words, "Father, Joseph is alive. He's ruler of all Egypt." Jacob blinked. "What? No, that's not possible. Joseph is gone." "No, Father," Judah said, stepping forward. "We lied to you. Years ago, we sold him. We let you believe he was dead. We were wrong, and we are sorry." Tears fell down Jacob's cheeks, and then he looked at the gifts, the wagons, the food, and the clothes, and hope filled his heart again. "My son Joseph is alive," he whispered. "Then I must go to him before I die." There was no time to waste. Jacob gathered his family, his sons, their wives, their children, and all they owned, and began the journey to Egypt. It was a long trip, with hundreds of people and animals, but Jacob's heart was light. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive. When they reached Beersheba, Jacob stopped to offer a sacrifice to God. That night, God spoke to him in a vision. "Jacob," God said, "do not be afraid to go to Egypt. I will go with you, and I will make your family into a great nation there, and one day I will bring you back. Joseph will be with you when your life ends." Jacob woke with peace in his heart. When they finally entered Egypt, the moment Joseph had longed for came at last. He rode in his royal chariot to meet his father. As soon as he saw him, Joseph ran into Jacob's arms. For a long time, they wept. Together. "My son," Jacob said, holding him tight, "now I can die in peace because I have seen your face again." Joseph introduced his family to Pharaoh, who welcomed them kindly and gave them the best land in Egypt, Goshen, a fertile place perfect for their flocks and herds. And there they settled, growing stronger with each year. But Joseph never forgot why it all happened, not because of luck, not because of his power, but because of God's plan. What had once seemed like the worst part of his life, being sold, betrayed, imprisoned, had led to something beautiful, the saving of many lives. And now, his whole family was together again. Forgiveness had restored what jealousy had broken, and Joseph's dream, his very first dream, was now fully alive. Forgiveness and family. The land of Goshen blossomed under the care of Joseph's family. It became a place of safety, of healing, and of new beginnings. Jacob, now old and content, lived surrounded by the sons he had once feared to lose and the grandchildren who played at his feet. Joseph visited often, watching his nephews and nieces run through the fields, listening to their laughter, and smiling at how different life had become. But even in times of peace, the past sometimes lingers. As the years passed, Jacob grew weaker. One day he called for Joseph. "Promise me," he said, "that you won't bury me in Egypt. Take me back to our family's land, to the cave where Abraham, Isaac, and your mother Rachel were buried." Joseph held his father's hand and nodded. "I promise." Then Jacob gathered all his sons and blessed them one by one with words of wisdom, warning, and hope. And when he had finished, Jacob breathed his last breath and was gathered to his people. Grief filled the house. Joseph wept over his father and kissed him goodbye. With Pharaoh's permission, he led a great procession to Canaan to bury Jacob with honor. But when they returned to Egypt, Joseph's brothers grew fearful again. "What if Joseph is still angry?" they whispered. "What if he was only kind to us because of father?" They sent a message to Joseph. "Before your father died, he asked us to tell you, 'Please forgive your brothers for the wrongs they did to you.' Then they came in person, bowed before him, and said, 'We are your servants.'" Joseph's heart broke. He saw that even after all these years, his brothers still doubted his love. He began to cry. "Don't be afraid," he said gently. "Am I in the place of God? You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to save many lives. So don't be afraid. I will take care of you and your children." And he did. With kindness and grace, Joseph provided for his family. He taught them to forgive, to hope, to trust. Joseph lived to see his great-grandchildren and told them all the stories of how God had been with him, from the fields of Canaan, to the prison, to Pharaoh's palace. Before his death, he gathered his family close and said, "One day, God will take you back to the land He promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And when he does, take my bones with you." Joseph died at 110 years old, full of peace and honor. And though he had worn the robes of Egypt, he was always a son of Israel, faithful, courageous, and full of dreams. And so the story ends, not just with a dream come true, but with a family, restored, a future preserved, and a God who never left Joseph's side. The end.